The Lumber Room by Saki. By standing on a chair in the library, one could reach a shelf on which lay a fat, important-looking key. The key was as important as it looked. It was the instrument which kept the mysteries of the lumber room secure, which opened a way only for aunts and such like privileged persons. The key turned stiffly in the lock, but it turned. The door opened, and Nicholas was in an unknown land, compared with which the gooseberry garden was a stale delight. Often and often Nicholas had pictured to himself what the lumber room might be like, that region that was so carefully sealed from youthful eyes, and concerning which no questions were ever answered. It came up to his expectations. In the first place, it was large and dimly lit, one high window opening onto the forbidden garden being its only source of illumination. In the second place, it was a storehouse of unimagined treasures. The aunt by assertion was one of those people who think that things spoil by use and consign them to dust and damp by way of preserving them. The house was rather bare and cheerless, but here there were wonderful things for the eye to feast on. First and foremost, there was a piece of framed tapestry that was evidently meant to be a fire screen. To Nicholas, it was a living, breathing story. He sat down on a roll of Indian hangings, glowing in wonderful colors beneath a layer of dust, and took in all the details of the tapestry picture. A man dressed in the hunting costume of some remote period had just shot a stag with an arrow. It could not have been a difficult shot, because the stag was only 1 or 2 paces away from him. In the thickly growing vegetation that the picture suggested, it would not have been difficult to creep up to a feeding stag, and the 2 spotted dogs that were springing forward to join in the chase had evidently been trained to keep to heel till the arrow was discharged. That part of the picture was simple, if interesting. But did the huntsman see what Nicholas saw? That 4 galloping wolves were coming in his direction through the wood. There might be more than 4 of them hidden behind the trees, and in any case, would the man and his dogs be able to cope with the 4 wolves if they made an attack? The man had only 2 arrows left in his quiver, and he might miss with 1 or both of them. All one knew about his skill in shooting was that he could hit a large stag at a ridiculously short range. Nicholas sat for many golden minutes, revolving the possibilities of the scene. He was inclined to think that the man and his dogs were in a tight corner. But there were other objects of delight and interest claiming his instant attention. There were quaint, twisted candlesticks in the shape of snakes, and a teapot fashioned like a china duck. How dull and shapeless the nursery teapot seemed in comparison. And there was a carved sandalwood box packed tight with aromatic cotton wool, and between the layers of cotton wool were little brass figures, hump-necked bulls, and peacocks and goblins, delightful to see and to handle. Less promising in appearance was a large square book with plain black covers. Nicholas peeped into it, and behold, it was full of colored pictures of birds, and such birds! In the garden and in the lanes when he went for a walk, Nicholas came across a few birds, of which the largest were an occasional magpie or wood pigeon. Here were herons and bustards, kites, toucans, ibises, golden pheasants, a whole portrait gallery of undreamed-of creatures. And as he was admiring the coloring of the mandarin duck and assigning a life history to it, the voice of his aunt shouting his name came from the gooseberry garden outside. She had grown suspicious at his long disappearance and had leapt to the conclusion that he had climbed over the wall. She was now engaged in energetic and rather hopeless search for him among the artichokes and raspberry canes. "Nicholas! Nicholas!" she screamed. "You are to come out of this at once. It's no use trying to hide there. I can see you all the time." It was probably the first time for 20 years that anyone had smiled in that lumber room. Presently, the angry repetitions of Nicholas's name gave way to a shriek and a cry for somebody to come quickly. Nicholas shut the book, restored it carefully to its place in a corner, and shook some dust from a neighboring pile of newspapers over it. Then he crept from the room, locked the door, and replaced the key exactly where he had found it. His aunt was still calling his name when he sauntered into the front garden. "Who's calling?" he asked. "Me," came the answer from the other side of the wall. "Didn't you hear me? I've been looking for you in the gooseberry garden, and I've slipped into the rainwater tank. Luckily there was no water in it, but the sides are slippery, and I can't get out. Fetch the little ladder from under the cherry tree." "I was told I wasn't to go into the gooseberry garden," said Nicholas promptly. "I told you not to, and now I tell you that you may," came the voice from the rainwater tank rather impatiently. "Your voice doesn't sound like Aunt's," objected Nicholas. "You may be the evil one tempting me to be disobedient. Aunt often tells me that the evil one tempts me and that I always yield. This time, I'm not going to yield."